The Perpetual Breakaway Podcast with your hosts Nick and Junior and producer Vince, bringing you elite fantasy hockey information to help you win your fantasy leagues and win at life.
Episode 48.
Let's go.
Junior,
Should we just jump right into it?
you know what? We're pressed on time. Yeah, why not?
Let's go. All right, here we go. And now, introducing our very first guest, the fantasy hockey doctor himself, co-host of the Fantasy Hockey Life podcast and the Dobber Prospects Report podcast, editor at Dobber Prospects and contributor to EP Rinkside. From Santa Cruz, California, the one, the only, Victor Nuño. Let's go.
Hey, Victor, how are you?
That was by far the best intro I've ever gotten. I really appreciate that.
Yes. You know what? I think we could just stop the podcast right there. We won. We won the day.
I might have woke up my kids, but it's okay.
Oh, man, that was great. I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Well, thanks for being here. You are our inaugural, our number one and our first and only guest so far on this podcast. So we thank you very much for coming and joining us. We've been doing this now for 48 episodes, which means 48 weeks in a row. We haven't even hit our 1 year mark yet. But we're very excited to keep going, and we love talking fantasy hockey. We love having these discussions with people, and you might be our most knowledgeable guest.
Ever,
Considering you're our first. So
Low bar. I'll take it, though.
Excellent. Well, Junior, do you want to get started, or do we have anything else to say before we get started?
No, I say let's jump right into it. There's a lot of content to come, so
All right.
why don't you start us off with the Calder nominees?
Okay. Well, so Victor, I know that you do have your Dobber Prospect Report podcast. We listen to it all the time. Fantasy Hockey Life as well. And you kind of already touched on a lot of these things already, but I wanted to ask you, for our listeners who might be maybe a little bit newer, some of them, to fantasy hockey, and they keep asking us the same kind of questions all the time. So we wanted your take on some of this. So I wanted to touch base with you, as there are several young hockey players that are going to be making the rookie seasons this 2024-25 season. And like, out of these names, we want to see who is maybe the nominee, the best chances of actually winning the Calder Memorial Trophy as the best rookie of the year. And we wanted your feedback maybe on some of these players. So I went on the Vegas betting sites, basically, and I took a look at who is the favorite to win the Calder before the season even started, before any actual NHL games have been played. And I was going to touch with you on maybe some of these players, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the number one guy on the list right now is Matvei Michkov, who we just traded for on the DPR
Yeah.
Fantasy Dynasty League. We wanted your take on Matvei Michkov. Who are we looking at here? Are we looking at a player like... So we've been talking about this a little bit, and sorry, I just wanted to make sure everybody understood. We kind of predict 45 points for him as a rookie, 45 to 50 points as a rookie. And that's based on a lot of different factors, but we've seen rookies in the past have very good rookie seasons at 45 to 50 points. So we're basing him as one of those elite players. Are we wrong? Are we being silly? We got Philadelphia fans coming after us saying that we don't know what we're talking about. So we wanted your take on that.
Yeah, well, you guys made a terrible trade, and you ruined it. Yeah, no, he's a very tricky one, right? Because he's a very unconventional rookie. He's coming in, having played professional seasons in the KHL, obviously. So the adjustment in that sense isn't going to hurt him. I do think there should be a fair amount of concern with how he's going to fit into the Tortorella lineup, because he has some habits that I'm pretty sure he is not going to like. And that's why I think he's one of the players in terms of Calder betting odds that I think has probably one of the widest ranges of outcomes, right? Just because I could see him putting up 70-ish points. I could see him getting benched for half the season and getting healthy scratched and putting up like 40 or 35 points, I think you're probably on the conservative end, but it's hard to know how all that's going to play out, right? Because he might get in line and he might, change his attitude and start back checking hard. It would be a welcome sight. I haven't seen much of that. So he could turn it around, but I think it's going to be a bit of a struggle. And I know that some sites are projecting him as top line and, top power play. And I think that he will get that look, but I'm not convinced that he stays there the whole season. And it's going to be hard to put up more than, a 55-point pace unless he's in that role all season. So I think you guys are in the ballpark. I think the range is probably between 45 and 65, but there's certainly room to do worse and potentially better. So I think he's just one of the more polarizing players, because I think he really needs, like, he didn't need to worry about some of those things. He got a lot of latitude with his role in the KHL, and I don't know that he's going to get that with the Flyers. So it would make me a little nervous in terms of betting for him on the Calder. I wouldn't be nervous about your acquisition in the league. I was joking about that. He's a great player. I think he's going to be fine. And you don't know. I mean, they may get tired of Torts and they may fire him after a month, and then the new coach comes in and gives him all the time and he knocks it out of the park, So all of those things are possible. It's really hard to predict. But I think in the player needs a certain situation to thrive, and I'm not 100% sure he's going to get it. So I see where you guys are coming from.
You would think, though, that they kind of spoke to Torts before making the pick, right? Like, he doesn't have necessarily the back-checking qualities, but he's talented enough to make a difference on your team. Like, I'm sure that conversation had to happen at some point before drafting him and saying, here, Torts, we're giving you a toy. Please shut him down. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know how much really a coach gets in. Like, his opinion might matter a little bit, but I don't know how much he would really be involved in that kind of thing, because they're building something for years to come, right? So, Torts, like Victor said, might only be there a month. You're really gonna ask for an opinion of someone that's not going to be there forever?
I mean, if it's Torts or Mishkov, I guess Torts is the one that's going to be out, right?
Take care. Take
the
care.
One that usually
Torts.
loses is the coach.
Yes.
Always.
Yes.
I agree with you. I wonder. I hear what you're saying, but I think Danny Briere and Jones were like not too interested in what Torts thought, quite frankly.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Makes sense.
Well, the next player on the list is tied. So I'll mention both of them, but I know that you are a San Jose fan. Is that right? Am I kind of?
Well, I mean, I grew up a San Jose Sharks fan. That's what got me in. The Great White upset of the Detroit Red Wings when they were President's Trophy winners.
Arthur Serby.
Yeah, he was the wall. But I think as I've tried to be more neutral the last 4 or 5 years podcasting, I don't say that I am, but they're the team that I've followed for the longest. But I try to be neutral, so I would say no, I'm not a Sharks fan.
Okay, you have a soft spot for them. I think that's fair.
Definitely. If they won, I would be very, very happy. Happier than most teams.
Okay.
Yeah. So we kind of have the same thing, right? We have Montreal fans that tell us that we're too conservative for the Habs. We're not real Montreal fans. And we kind of take that as a good thing because we're trying to be impartial as much as possible. So, but the players that we were going to mention is Logan Stankoven from Dallas and Macklin Celebrini. They're both tied for the next best odds according to Vegas. So if you want, you could just choose one of them. You could mention both, however you want to proceed.
Yeah, I mean, there's such different situations, right? I mean, you have Stankoven, who has lit up the AHL and basically proved everyone wrong as a small guy. And he's playing for a really good team in Dallas, right? I mean, I was kind of surprised, frankly, when Edmonton beat them. in the semifinals, and I think that they're a good candidate to be back in the Western Conference Finals. So he has more to work with, but he also has less opportunity, and that's a slight concern. Although I think he has a great chance, and I think he'd be one of my favorites. Celebrini, on the other hand, has a wide open opportunity with not as much to work with. Let's just put it that way. Although there's a lot of infusion of talent, right? I mean, Smith is coming at the same time. Eklund is maturing. Toffoli was a good signing. They also had some insulation from guys like Wenberg and Delandria. Bordelot maybe is coming along, so they should be a better team to watch and have a little bit more to work with. But I that's the calculus for me. I think that I would take Celebrini, actually, just because I don't think Dallas needs to give Logan Stankoven all that opportunity. They have other toys and tools to work with. I do worry a little bit that Celebrini and Smith, who I know we're going to talk about, are going to cannibalize each other's opportunity and potentially the votes when it comes down to it, because they are on the same team. And frankly, Askarov is on this list too. So there's all these Sharks on there, and that makes it a little bit complicated in terms of what's happening. But I also think that Celebrini is just so dang good that he might just prove everyone wrong. But I have a question for you guys. Bedard won last year. Do you know the last time back-to-back 18-year-olds won the Calder?
Ooh. Definitely not Joe Thornton. No. With Boston, he hadn't won.
No, he didn't start well for a while. No.
Yeah, he had a tough go.
Who is it?
I'll spoil it for you. It's never happened.
I was
Really?
going to say, wow, 18 years old, eh? Wow.
So it's very rare. It's very rare for 18-year-olds. So that's the big calculus. And, of course, remember, he was 17 all season. He's such a young 18-year-old. He will be a young 18-year-old all season. But
generational. I mean,
yeah. And he can do it all. I think when it comes down to the votes, in terms of him doing it all and being a two-way player and making the Sharks better as a team, even though I still think they'll be bad, I think we'll probably go a long way in terms of opening the eyes of the voters.
yeah. Well, I mean, hearing you guys speak in I think it was the Dobber Prospect report, where you were mentioning Celebrini might not be Bedard, but he's maybe a tier below, and that's not really a bad thing. He's still going to be a franchise center. He's still going to be elite, and he's probably going to be an all-star many years to come.
Absolutely.
Right? So whether it's points only is mostly what we do, but we do touch on other things. Does Celebrini have those peripherals as well? I know Stankoven doesn't really, but I feel like Celebrini is more of an all-around player, that he's going to do a little bit of everything.
Sometimes we like to speak of him a bit like a Jonathan Taves, right? Is that what we were saying the other day?
Maybe a better Jonathan Taves.
But yeah, probably a more skilled Jonathan
Maybe
Taves,
that's just my opinion. Yeah.
But that kind of tier.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned, I've talked about him as a blend of Kane and Taves.
That's
Oh,
right.
wow.
Stick with the Chicago, because I do think he is that mold. He's always going to be two-way responsible. He's going to back check. He's going to have takeaways. He's going to be out there whether you're up or down. But he also has I think a little bit more, shiftiness to him, a little bit more raw skill, a little bit more DQ 101. Not as much as Kane, but kind of blend between the two. To answer your other question, I pulled up my Fantasy Hockey Life player card because I couldn't remember, and he has very good shots. He has average hits and almost no blocks. So
Right.
he will, and actually an average amount of penalty minutes if you do that sort of thing. So he will be okay in peripherals, not amazing.
Awesome. Moving right along, somebody that Junior and I had a big trade end of last season. I traded away Cutter Gauthier in order to obtain Hagel from Tampa Bay, because I won last year in our league, and I needed that extra little boost. I was getting a little bit nervous, so I traded away Cutter Gauthier. I paid a lot, but I secured myself the trophy, so that's all that really matters for me.
This guy right here.
This guy right here, exactly. But what do we think Cutter Gauthier is able to do this year? Is he going to be coming in? I mean, when I traded him away, I kind of felt that he might never become that point per game player, but maybe I was totally wrong. I really don't know what to expect from Cutter Gauthier next year and in his career.
Yeah, I think he's a bit tricky because we've seen him excel, right, in college. He was awesome at the World Juniors, and against the higher level competition, he has done really well. But I'm a little skeptical, like you, of the high end output, and part of that is because of his all around game. I think he has a little bit more all around skill, but he also has shown to be kind of unidimensional at times. You know, kind of just skate in and rip a shot, which he's really good at, and he has some playmaking, but I think he's going to have to diversify a little bit more to get more points in the NHL. And I'm not saying he can't do that, but I think it's going to have to work a little bit more to get there. And the Ducks also have a lot of options, right? They have a pretty strong pool, and they have some guys that are going to need some ice time. So I think it kind of depends also what they do with Zegras, because those two, if they're in the same lineup, I think could work. But if Zegras is moved, then how does the forward pool round out, and where does Gauthier sit? Do they have another top line wing? I don't know. I think he's clearly a wing. I don't think he's a center. So
Yeah, agreed.
he has to have the right center and the right. And I think Carlson could be it, but
Yeah.
Carlson can only play with two wingers. So if he's playing with Vetrano or Zegras or Terry, I think there's just more questions. And to me, there's always those guys that push themselves to the top and are, no matter what, the top. And I don't think Gauthier is that guy. I think he's a tier below. And so he could be, I think he could get to, point per game ish. But I think he's more of a 65, 75 if all goes right, which is kind of more in that really good tier and not elite tier.
Yeah, he's more of a complement to a top tier player as opposed to being the top tier player himself.
Well, I exactly what Victor just said. It's like if you have that Zegras, who's all skill and flash, having a Gauthier there to support him, to get in the corners, win the battles, go in front of the net, it makes space for those players. It's a good complement piece. And I think you always need you can't have three guys that are exactly the same. It doesn't make sense, right? There's only so many shots to go around. You already touched on Will Smith. Was there anything you wanted to add as he comes up next, or tied with Gauthier actually, for the odds here?
Well, I know it's a bit controversial, but I think Smith might have more points than Celebrini. I just think that he is. Well, first of all, they were both in college, right? And but that's Smith's role, right? It's all gas all the time, all offense. His defensive game is not horrible, but it's closer to that end than great, right? And so he's not going to be out there. He's going to get more offensive zone starts. He's going to get more optimal matchups. Whereas Celebrini is probably going to get even deployment. Just not have to, and that for a coach that's a dream. For a fantasy asset, you'd rather have Smith, and all things equal, right? You'd rather have the guy who's always out there for the offensive draws, always out there on the power play. So I think it's possible that he does better. I'm not necessarily saying that's for sure going to happen, because I think that Celebrini is more talented, but eventually they might lean on Smith in that way, where they are just hoping for points from him. I'm not sure that it'll work out that this year. There's so much, unknown about what that team is going to look like, so it's unclear. But I do think that's an interesting point, and I would be really interested to see what happens if Will Smith ends up with 65, 70 points, and then Celebrini is 5 to 10 points lower, but did everything else better. I think it'll be interesting to see what the votes come out to. Although Celebrini might be higher, and then it's a moot point.
Right.
At least he doesn't have Torts there as coach to slow him down.
That's right.
So coaching is not in question, at least.
But yeah, it's going to be up in the air for sure. The deployment is king, right? We've said it before. Having the opportunity to produce is maybe just as important as the skill as well. Sometimes.
Let me do this next one, please.
Oh, you do the next
you
one.
do the next one.
We've had so many arguments about this, Victor.
So Victor, you need to understand. I am not one of the people that think that Lane Hudson is going to be this next Quinn Hughes like other Habs fan. I'm actually very worried about Lane Hudson. I think his size worries me. I feel this year he should be in the AHL, but that's another story. But I feel he could potentially just be a power play specialist. So am I like off the rocker? And he could be the next great number one defenseman for the Habs, or are expectations a little high for him?
Well, I think he is someone who has very wide range of outcomes, right? He absolutely could be the next, Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes, but his defensive game needs to come a long way. When Makar came into the league, he was kind of like that, like all offense, and he was like not so good defensively, but his defensive game now is excellent, and I think you can say the same for Hughes, maybe even plus because he was excellent all around this year, and I think Hudson has come a long way, but he still has a ways to go, and he still gets pushed off pucks, and he still makes kind of bad reads, turns the wrong way, makes bonehead plays. Was it the World Championship where he made a giveaway and it cost him a goal? I can't remember. I was watching so many things.
Yeah.
It definitely happens with him. So I think it's the kind of thing where he might be the type of player who, at least for a while, a year or two, needs a really solid partner who can clean up those mistakes. And then I think the hope is eventually he doesn't need that, but he has work to do. I agree with you. He should be in the AHL, in my opinion. I think he's got work to do, and there's no reason to rush him. I know everybody, I want to see him in the NHL, but is that what's best for him and for the Habs long term? I'm not so sure. I think the Habs are still in this kind of like, we're not really competitive, or are we? Like, I know they got Line A, but I'm still not convinced that they're a contender yet. So
Definitely not.
Why do we push this guy off the deep end and let him drown? I think that could be really hard for him. So I think if they really do this right and they really bring his defensive game and they work with him, which I think he's capable of, he's shown progress already, then I think he can get there to be a Quinn Hughes type. But it's still debatable whether he will and can.
Victor, if I may, so in your opinion, what determines whether a prospect can develop better in the NHL as opposed to being developed in the AHL? Because we see it sometimes how some players develop better in the NHL, are able to develop in the NHL given the opportunity, and others need the AHL more so than the NHL. Is there something in particular that distinguishes that, or is that just a feel for the player or the situation?
Well, I think I would slightly disagree with your premise there, in the sense that I don't think the NHL is a development league, period.
Okay.
Full stop. So I think, to put words in your mouth a little bit, there are some players who can hang in the NHL and develop aspects of their game better. And I think what it often comes down to is they can hang defensively, they can hang in multiple situations, and they can work on developing the offensive upside that they once had, that they can then flourish. But most of the time, if there are these unidimensional players who just have a good shot or just are a small playmaking winger, that you can't. That's not a development path that works in the NHL, because the NHL is not a development league. You have to be competitive right away. So most of the time, that's why I think most of the time it's better to be in the AHL. But there are players who have shown that they can buck that trend. I think that's something we just talked about Stankov, and that's something that's been true for him all along. He is, you saw in the playoffs, like he pulled a Mark Stone on Mark Stone. That was one of my favorite parts. He just took the puck off of him and was like, what happened? But that's because he's had that his whole career. Like, he's always been attuned to both sides of the game. And I think that's part of it, is that if they're competent both ways, they can hang and they can be trusted. And just think about it from a coaching perspective. If you have this guy who can only do one or two things, and there's only certain situations in the whole game you trust him to be out there, you're not going to play him, and that isn't going to be good for him. It's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for anybody. So why are you there? You got to go to the AHL.
Makes sense. Thanks for that.
Nick, talking about one player who's done his job in the AHL.
Dustin Wolf.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so we don't have Cat Silverman here, but so Dustin is one of these smaller goalies, and it scares me. It scares me a lot because it's very difficult. It's very rare to see a smaller goalie do really well in the NHL. Obviously there's UC Saros, who's a smaller goalie. He excels year in, year out. Dustin Wolf, I kind of feel like they're kind of throwing him to the wolves here.
No pun intended.
Well, definitely a pun intended there. Calgary is looking like they're in a rebuild. They might not admit it right away, but We also heard rumors that their veterans are up for trade as well. So do we think Dustin Wolf is just going to get his confidence shot here? Do we think that he has an opportunity? He's currently on this Calder list, so clearly Vegas has some hope in him.
Do I? Yes, I do. I definitely think he does. And I think that he has one thing that a lot of people don't, is he has the clearest opportunity of any of the goalies that could be on this list. And I think there are several that could be entertained as Calder candidates, but he's the favorite just because they traded away Jacob Markstrom, and Dan Vladesh has been up and down, questionable at times, right?
Yeah.
He's had some decent play, but certainly not anything sustainable. Not that Wolf has either, but he hasn't really gotten the opportunity, I would say. I mean, he did play a fair number of games last season, but the team was in disarray, and guys were getting traded, and they had nothing to play for. So, and I did when I did talk to Kat about him, and we're both like, president and vice president of the Dustin Wolf fan club, so we love him. But I think that when you watched him, he's one of these guys who really needs to read and react to his defense, and he really needs to play really well positionally because he's smaller and he's such an excellent skater. And a lot of what was happening was difficult to predict, and so he was trying to react to things that were unpredictable. There was a lot of chaos. So I don't know how much we can read into what happened last season, because I watched some of those games, and I've watched his AHL games, and I'm like, who is this guy? This doesn't look like the same guy. And so I think that yes, he can be great in the NHL, but he needs a predictable situation that I think Calgary can at least give him to some extent, even though they might be rebuilding, because I think they really want to see what they have. I mean, they know he can't go back to the AHL. There's nothing else to do there. He's done amazing. They really need to see, what do they have with him, and is this really our future starting goalie, or is this just another small guy who is not as good as UC Saros, which is like pretty much everybody.
Right. Exactly.
Well, since we're already speaking of goalies, should we go to like a combination of Wallstedt and Askarov, who were drafted, was it in the same year?
Don't ask me, ask Victor.
Right? Yes. The goalie the Oilers ultimately skipped over.
I'm sure Oilers fans don't remember that at all.
Do we think, we know Askarov should get a decent opportunity. Does Wallstedt get any action this year, seeing as Fleury is still there on an extension? Gustafsson still there.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know, right? Because I think that Gustafsson is such an interesting case, because he was so good at times, and then it just fell off a cliff, and I was really confused as to what was happening. But I think that's hard when you're transitioning to a larger role. Not everyone handles it well. I definitely think that Wallstedt is the best prospect goalie out there. Better than Askarov, but I don't know that it's going to happen this year. I also think if you're Minnesota, there's just no reason to rush him, even though we all want to see him, and yeah, they have Fleury and Gustafsson. Quite frankly, I think that Jesper Wallstedt is the best of the three already. I mean, not Flower 5 years ago, but Flower now is obviously a different situation. So yeah, they probably shouldn't, but I think sometimes NHL teams and GMs just can't help themselves. So he probably will see some games, but I don't think he's going to get more than 10 to 15. So I don't think he's going to have enough to really have a Calder resume, but it's probably best for him, and he's done well for Iowa, and he might. I think the plan is probably to transition him slowly over the next year or two, and get somewhere in that 10 to 20 starts, and then the following year 20 to 30, and then he's off.
Just to make sure, because we have Askarov as one of our listener questions after as well, so we could skip Askarov for now, and Rutger McGordy got traded to Pittsburgh. And I know everybody gets excited, right? Like, I'm playing with Crosby, maybe. If I'm not playing with Crosby, I'm playing with Malkin. So
guaranteed 50 goal scorer. Crosby.
All us fantasy nerds are going out there and we're chasing after a Rutger McGordy. Does he have an opportunity here to possibly put up points? Is he really a points getter? I'm a bit confused, to be honest, how I should be valuing him.
Yeah, I think that He's definitely like he was the heart and soul of that USA team, right? And he scored points, but I think I probably could have scored 4 or 5 points on that team. No, I think he definitely is a better like locker room impact guy than he is necessarily going to be a point scorer. Not that he'll be bad for that, because I think he, and not to diminish his skill, he really is talented. But is he uber talented to the point where he's going to be, one of these prospects who scores a ton? I'm just not so sure about that either. I have some concerns. In fact, I traded him to Pete in a league, Peter Harling, in a league that I think we talked about it on one of the shows. And that's why, because I think that he is going to be, that was when he was in Winnipeg, so I was less confident in that. I think it's interesting him being in Pittsburgh because the wait time is 0 now. And so that has to be factored in. I'm not sure who Evgeny Malkin is anymore. He seemed to really struggle at the end of last season. Crosby, I'm convinced, can play till he's 50, and he'll be putting up point-per-game seasons. But I don't know about Malkin, so that diminishes a little bit potentially who you're playing with. But I do think that, he still could be quite good. But I also not 100% sure he'll be in the NHL all season because it's a big jump. Like, he was great in college, but it's a big jump, and I think that he might split the season. But I do think he's the kind of guy who is probably settles in at more of like a 50 to 60 point guy with strong perfs and other intangibles, but not necessarily the top asset. But in terms of like a win now team, like I think a lot of people have been asking me, I'm drafting a new dynasty and I want to win now. Then I think McGroarty moves to the top of your list, or not the top, but near the top of your list, because he's going to contribute now as opposed to guys who may not contribute for 2 or 3 years.
That's a good point. Guys, USA, the next 2 players are both USA players, Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard.
Love Ryan Leonard.
I love Gabe Perreault. So we have, like, I drafted Perreault late, and it got nixed by the commissioner on that year. Because I had too many players on my team. But I tried sneaking him in there. Gabe Perreault has had such a good college resume. And part of that scares me in the sense of who he was playing with, right? So there was a Will Smith on his line, and sorry, I'm forgetting the third player.
Wasn't it Leonard?
Yeah, okay,
Leonard.
that's right. It was Leonard. So
I was like, what? How did you forget that?
Right.
We're
How
just
did I
talking
forget
about it.
So all 3 of them played together all the time, and they were just dominant. Does Gabe Perreault have enough talent, Victor, to translate this to the NHL?
Definitely. I think he definitely does. It's interesting looking at those 3, right? Because, I think we're all tearing our hair out. Like, who is the driver of this line? Who's the best? Like, what? Yeah. But I think the reality is that they're all great, and they're all great at playing with each other. What we still don't know is, are they going to be great playing apart? We saw a little bit of that at the World Championships. We saw some separation of Leonard and Smith. But I think the one I've always said I'm most confident in his NHL or prognostication probability is Leonard. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be the best in fantasy, although he does do the perfs better than the other 2. But I think the thing about Perreault is that his brain is just insane. Like, he sees things that other people don't. And I think in some ways it might even be easier for him at the NHL level because there's better players, right? There's such great players in the NHL. The quality of competition is going to be an issue, perhaps, and his foot speed is going to be an issue. And his lack of physicality at times might be an issue. But I don't doubt his ability to make plays and score at the top level. What worries me the most about that situation is New York does not develop prospects well. And they seem to develop in spite of what the Rangers do, not anything that they do for them. So that makes me a little bit concerned. But we've seen others succeed. Recently, Keandre Miller is one of the recent examples. And even Will Cooley. Who's doing pretty well, Brendan Othman. So there's been some examples, but I think Perreault needs a more specific situation than the other 2. He definitely needs someone to transport the puck for him. That's not his strength. He needs someone to finish for him, which shouldn't be a big deal. because he's such a great playmaker. But he definitely needs a more specific situation. I think Leonard can play with anyone because he's just so tough as nails and crafty and more skilled than people give him credit for. And we've seen what Will Smith can do. I don't think that's really a question. He can drive a line. I think Will Smith needs someone to play defense a little bit for him, and so that might be a bit of an issue. He kind of just Will Smith screams Mark Scheifele to me. I don't know why. Like, just a guy who's really good offensively, but he just and Scheifele still to this day seems to just not care what happens. He's just like, well, I'm just gonna go score. Like that's his answer to why he doesn't play defense.
That works for fantasy. I mean, we're not going to complain,
great.
right?
It's great, yeah, and it hasn't affected his ice time much.
Yeah,
It's worked out for him.
Well, like one thing about Perot is that to Victor's point, I mean, New York kind of takes a long time sometimes to develop the prospects. But I just finished listening to Fantasy Hockey Life preview of the New York Rangers, and basically they were talking about how Lafreniere is now starting to come out and possibly have his breakout, if it's not already last season, maybe this season upcoming as well. And I know Dobber kind of takes that view as well of 200 games, and for bigger players maybe that 400 game range. So it'd be interesting to see, as the core is getting older, you're going to have these two young guys in New York with Cooley there. It's going to be interesting to see how New York goes. I'm looking forward to seeing Perot absolutely in the NHL. Mm-hmm. One guy that we had so we did a live show, and we did it for the draft. And on the draft,
4 hours long.
It was a marathon, and we weren't used to it. So by the end of it, we were kind of exhausted, and everybody saw it. But we kept saying, okay, but Zeev Buim is going to be picked here, right? And no, he's going to be picked here, right? And he just kept falling and falling and falling all the way to Minnesota. And it's a steal, thinking Faber, Buim, years to come.
Kivi Harju too. They drafted in the 3rd round.
Right. But
Never
all
know.
this to say, are we saying that Buim is that partner for Faber in the future? Do you see him, like, he has the worst odds out of everybody on this list?
Well, he's likely not going to play.
He's likely not going to play, I don't think, this year. But Victor, you tell me, is this somebody that we're expecting a cup of coffee in the NHL, or we're really not seeing that this year?
This season, I'm really not sure about that. I was angry when he fell that much. I was like, okay, he fell to 11. The Sharks are going to take him, right? No. I don't know what they were thinking. I think Zeev Buim is, I said it before, I think he's the best defenseman in this draft. I think he's incredible. I don't know what the hell everyone was thinking. That was crazy to me.
Thanks for justifying our thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it was literally making me angry. Like, why is this guy, like, what else does he have to do? He literally won almost everything he could last season. He was ridiculously good as a freshman for the best team in the country in college, which is, one of the best leagues you can play in as a draft eligible, aside from the professional leagues. Like, I don't understand it. Like, I think maybe because he's 6 foot and left-handed, I guess. But I didn't really understand it. I don't think he's going to play this year. I think, he hasn't signed yet, so he would have to sign. I think if he did sign, I certainly think he could play this year. Again, I'm not sure that that's best for him, but I also definitely agree, like, him and Faber, I don't know that they'll play together. What they might do is just put them on different pairs, and then, like, no one's going to score on them on either of those pairs. So that's going to be a nightmare for teams for a long time. But, yeah, Minnesota was incredibly lucky to get him at 12. I mean, I literally think we're going to look back 5 years from now and say he was the best defenseman of this draft. In terms of impact on the game, like, his WAR and GAR are going to be, I think, better than anyone's. I certainly think that Perek, has better offensive upside. And, I think some of the other guys maybe offensively and for fantasy might be better, but I'm not convinced of that either. I think Buia might be right there, and he's going to be, I think, the most impactful for his team.
Awesome. Well, is there anybody else, Victor, from the top of your head maybe, that you think should be on this list for a Calder nominee, or you think this is pretty much it?
No, I think it's really good. I'm doing a Calder show soon with Keeping Karlsson, and so I'm just starting to put my list together because that's in a couple weeks, so you guys get a preview. I do think that someone that I would put in the top 10 that we haven't touched on is Justice Annunen. I think that he has a pretty good chance of playing at least as many games as I just blanked on his name.
Askarov?
No,
Georgiev.
Oh, Georgiev. I thought he was comparing him to the other Calder nominee.
Well, yeah, but Georgiev isn't the most steady.
Yeah, on a contract
Eddie,
year
right?
as well, Georgiev.
Yeah. So I think he has a pretty good chance. The other one I would say is Brad Lambert. If he makes the team, I think he could be really good. Although Winnipeg tends to not give those guys opportunity, but he was awesome. And the last one is Maverick Bork, who definitely has a spot in Dallas with Pavelski retiring, and we've seen him and Stankoven play really well together. So, but then that's another question of opportunity and how much does he play. So those three I think are in the conversation, and I could see them catching fire. Yes, Annunen is the one that I would have the most confidence in, just because I think he's super talented and seems like he's figured his game out, and there's an opportunity there. Which the other ones I think are kind of plus minus.
Yeah, in all
Makes sense.
in all seriousness, I've tried getting Annunen multiple times, but nobody wants to budge right now. So, people we play with are pretty smart, I guess, or they just listen to the show and take all my
right.
all
Let's
my
take the
takes.
credit
Right?
for it. It's best
Let's take the
value.
credit. Yeah.
All right, that was pretty thorough. I like that. That was a
Thank you.
lot of insight for sure.
That's actually really, really good. We have listener questions, so
Yeah.
if you don't mind, we're just gonna throw them out there and see what you have to say about them, because we don't have many people that are.
I mean, they listen. They just don't all engage.
They don't all interact.
They
That's
don't
true.
exactly.
That's
They don't
true.
all
So
interact.
we always get excited when we get our fans or our listeners interacting with us, asking us questions. So this one is really meant for you because we let them know that you were going to be on the show. And this one is from listener Dan. He said, regarding goalies, between defensemen and forwards, goalies, so all positions, what determines for you whether it's age or something else, when a player has not played in the NHL, should we maybe give up on that prospect, maybe cut ties with him? Is there a certain age that you think we should do that? Is it really like he's not getting the opportunity? I've been guilty of cutting prospects too early, and one of that is Thomas Harley. So I really saw that he wasn't doing well. I traded him away for peanuts.
Ouch.
And it hurts. It hurts a lot right now. And it's a cap league, too. That entry-level contract would have been great. But anyway, so do you have a cutoff for these players? Like, how do you know when it's time to give up on a prospect?
I think that's a really good question. Good job, Dan. I think that's a tough one. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule. I don't think you can just say, like, it's X for everybody, because it does depend. I think one of the biggest things is what we talked about at the beginning, really being objective. That's why I think it's really important to be objective and not be a homer, and also try to be objective with your evaluations. Like, there are guys that we all love, but trying to, like, really separate your own bias and say, like, what else is going on, particularly with the team, because sometimes you may think this person's really great. The team just obviously doesn't agree. I think one example for me, that's a good one, Ville Heinola. I've always liked Ville Heinola. I think he's a really talented player. I think some of his defensive lapses are way overrated. But the Winnipeg Jets seem to not agree with me. So that's one of those situations where you're just like, okay, like, I have to reevaluate how I think about this player, because guys have passed him, on the depth chart. And so that's a key thing. When other prospects pass you on the depth chart, that is a really big sign that either you're not progressing fast enough or the team is looking for something else. And I think you always have to take into account the total impact on the game, because just because they're good in fantasy doesn't mean that the teams are trying to win. The teams are not trying to help our fantasy team. That is clear. Where they have made that abundantly clear that they don't care about our fantasy team. So you have to really keep that in mind. And it's really, I think, just really reassessing the situation. I think when you see someone really skyrocket up the ranks and do great, I mean, obviously that's very easy, but it's really about looking not so much how many games, because you can look at games, but you have to see, like, what was the opportunity, how many minutes did they get, did they get a chance to succeed. And I think, we've seen situations like Lafreniere, you're just talking about, as a good example. Like, early on, he was getting, what was it, like 10, 14 minutes, like
Fourth
really
line.
low ice time, fourth line. What do you expect from that, right? Like, you look at that and say, okay, he's played however many 100 games, but, like, what did we learn from that? Not really much. So you have to see, like, if he has gotten the opportunity and still not produced, and or if someone has passed him, then it's time to reevaluate, and you may need to downgrade.
I think that actually answers Dan's follow-up question as well, because Dan's follow-up question was, well, if they start playing in the NHL, like, how many games do you give them where they're not producing? And a perfect example of that might be Capo Caco, right? When is it time to cut bait and say, well, should probably drop them? But it all depends on the opportunity that they've received.
Yeah.
And I think
I say it's time.
Yeah, listening to your show
Past time.
Fantasy Hockey Life, they said, like, if it's not this year, when is it going to be, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think he signed his RFA tender. He got a 1 year, so it's now or never. And I traded for him in a league, basically hoping that I didn't spend much. Obviously, it was pennies on the dollar, but I'm rebuilding in that league. So I said, you know what? Let's give it a shot. Whatever happens, happens.
Look, if you spend 2 years, like 1 year after the other, saying it's now or never, at some point it's never, right? I mean, how long can you keep going?
Yeah, until
now
Thomas Harley
Thomas
Harley comes out of nowhere and starts becoming a top pairing defenseman.
All right, moving on to the next listener question from listener Cappy. Traditionally, the Montreal Canadiens find themselves a star goaltender. They possibly have one in Jacob Fowler, 19 years old, waiting in the wings, still years away. However, the recent rumors that they were in on the Askarov sweepstakes, is there a big enough difference between Askarov and Fowler for the Canadiens to have given up significant assets to obtain?
That's a great question. I think it depends on what they were giving up. I mean, look at what the Sharks gave up. I don't think that's a big deal.
No.
I think that was a little bit underwhelming as far as a lot of people are concerned. So what are they talking about? A late first, and
I think there was a rumor out there that they wanted Owen Beck as part of the deal.
which sold.
I would have done it.
100%.
Late first,
Right?
Owen Beck, sure.
Yep. I mean, I think to answer the other part of the question, there's such different goalies. I think the high-end upside is probably similar, but they're very different in terms of their style. Fowler is much more controlled in his movements, very, very precise, and maybe not as athletic, but he has good recoveries and good improvisation. Whereas Askarov is just like, he's like the all feels guy. He's just like all vibes, and he's incredibly athletic, and his save selection is chaotic, but it works most of the time. He's someone I have a little bit of concern about because of the style that he plays. Like, he's more likely to injure himself. He's also likely to be very unpredictable in terms of his value, which concerns me a little bit in terms of fantasy. Like, we always talk about goalies, they're voodoo and they can be up and down. I think he's a classic example of that. I think in terms of like your heart rate and watching him as a fan and maybe a GM, I think I'd rather have Fowler just because I know what I'm getting. Askarov, I mean, he's exciting, but he's exciting in lots of ways, right? He could be exciting in terms of letting in silly goals, or making incredible saves. So he's going to pull the fans out of their seat one way or another, and I think that's important to keep in mind. But in terms of like the high end outcome, I'm not sure that it's that far off. I think Fowler still has a ways to go, though. Obviously, he hasn't shown it at the AHL level, whereas Askarov, he has and he hasn't. He's also been inconsistent in the AHL. Like, he's been really poor in the playoffs. So it seems like sometimes in the big moments he also struggles, like at the World Juniors. So that's interesting.
The way you're talking about Askarov, I kind of feel like a flashback of Dominic Hasek.
Yeah, I was going to say. I was thinking the same.
Right? Like, erratic goaltending movements and possibly injuring himself, but that just made me think of Hasek right away.
I just want to see Askarov bench press the net in the International Hockey League and watch Bettman's reaction to it.
It's going to happen. For sure.
All right, Vince, you had a question?
Yeah, unfortunately, I had a question, and I have two of these three players. So, okay, Victor. So, Vegas, we know there was a lot of change in Vegas, especially losing Marsha. So, if you can keep one of these following players in a points-only keeper, you have Alexander Holtz, Pavel Dorofeyev, and Victor Olofsson. Which one of these guys, if you don't know Victor, I'm the guy who really screws up the players' names on this podcast. So I'm very proud that I said that second name really well. But which
8 on 10. 8 on 10.
Which one of these three, fantasy-wise, do you think are actually going to break, if any of them are going to break out this year?
That's tricky. I think I would bet on Dorofeev.
Mm-hmm.
If any.
Oh, I like this. See how he said that?
Dorofeev,
Wow.
yes.
Okay, you got a 6 now. You didn't
Well, apparently the Russian way is Dorofeev.
Oh.
Okay, we'll stick to the way you said it.
Dorofeev is fine. Fun fact, I play in a beer league team with all Russians. They call themselves the good guys, the good Russians. So, sometimes I get some tips from them.
That's amazing.
That's fun.
But he's the one who is the most competent in all situations. And if we know anything about Bruce Cassidy, I think Alexander Holtz is going to be in a world of hurt this year. That guy does not know how to play defense. He never has learned, unfortunately. And Olofsson is also another unidimensional player. I don't know how these guys are going to fare in Vegas. I don't think it's going to go well. And Dorofeev, although no Selke Trophy winner, he's been at least competent. And he has proven that he can stick in the lineup. So I'm just going to take the guy who I know can stick in the lineup. I'm not convinced the other two even can. I think they might get relegated to the bottom 6 and be very situational, and that's going to be hard to score. Because we know Holt can score, but I think his opportunity is going to be limited. And I think same with Olofsson. He's proven to be pretty unidimensional.
I had a 2 out of 3 chance and I got 0 because I don't have him, but I have the other 2. Damn it.
It's okay.
All right, last question. So that's my question, which Nick and I are big on value above replacement in terms of draft strategy. So essentially, we'll always aim for the high-producing defenseman over a forward in the second tier, let's say, or below, like bottom of the first tier. Do you take that into account at all? Because we know Vince, that's not his thing. Vince is like forward points, and like he like goes to the D till the end.
Yes.
Do you have a specific strategy? Does that come into play at all? Or, I mean, a lot of it has to do with context, I'm sure, but.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you've heard Peter Harling and I have this argument all the time because he doesn't really believe in VORP either. So, and a lot of people say, like Vince, well, the forwards score more. And that is true. But again, understanding the value over replacement is really key because a 60-point forward versus a 50-point defenseman, it's just so much easier to come across a 60-point forward. It definitely depends on the context and the timing. You're not saying run out and grab them, in the second round or anything like that. But you have to adjust your value. You can't just go based on this guy scores more. You have to see what's out there. And you have to, in your draft, adjust your strategy. Like, how many of these guys are left, especially with defensemen? How many top power play for sure defensemen are there in this league? Not that many. Not even 32, right? Because a lot of them split time. A lot of them, have potential challengers. So you really have to kind of think about that in terms of what you're getting. And same with goalies. If you're having goalies, you have to think about how many are left and what is the value that you can get. And sometimes you need to fade, and sometimes you need to, reevaluate and move them up your board. So I think VORP is key. I think that, it's like math. You either lean into it and use it to your advantage, or you get owned by it one way or the other.
I'll start doing my
thank you for
homework.
that.
I promise.
So I'm laughing while you were saying that because we were literally just saying number one defenseman. There's not 32 of them. And Junior here is known as the person that said certain people are not number one defensemen, and then he got roasted on Twitter, roasted on YouTube, and people stopped listening to this podcast.
No, I like to see consistency before just labeling someone a number one defenseman. And there's those elite. Because I said Bouchard.
That's not the first name you said.
Hold on a
That's
second.
not the first
Can
name
I
you
finish,
said.
please? I said Evan Bouchard was not a number one defenseman yet because he hadn't produced consistently, so we don't know for sure that he's that guy. So I'd like to see at least 2 to 3 years of pacing for those points. And I did mention Quinn Hughes, but I knew deep down he will be a number one defenseman. I just said I'd like to see it one more year to just be sure, but I mean, yeah, I got a
fans
lot of
came
heat
after
from
him.
Vancouver fans, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was one of our most watched segments,
Yeah.
and literally the most commented on.
Most engaged, yeah. It's
Most
okay.
engaged
Most
audience.
engagement for sure.
And it was a lot of yelling.
Well, we're almost an hour in, Victor. Do you have time for a quick lightning round of head-to-head
Yeah,
players?
Let's do it. But I want to address your comment real quick because, I mean, I both agree and disagree with you in different ways. I think I agree with you in the sense that, yeah, you want to see it. You want to see him prove it. And I had the same thought about Quinn Hughes, too, a couple of seasons ago. I was like, is he a number one defenseman? And he wasn't playing in all situations. And, you know, I think he has proven that now. But in the other sense, if you don't jump on someone like in a dynasty league, especially someone like Bouchard, and this past season in redraft, if you don't bump them up your list a little bit, you're never going to get those guys. Yeah. So it depends on what you're talking about. If you're just talking about casually like sitting back and looking and having a discussion in general, totally, like, let's wait and see before we anoint anyone that. But also in the sense of like value and how you draft, you sometimes need to be a little bit ahead of the game and just kind of put it out there. So I think both ways can be true. And you got a lot of comments and hits.
In fairness, it was a non-fantasy discussion.
Okay.
In fairness, okay.
Sure.
All right, lightning round. Let's go.
All right. We usually have a soundbite for this, but my producer just told us that.
Oh, stop it with your sound bites.
Oh, new soundbite.
That's the odd man rush.
Okay.
All right. Yes.
All right, cut it. So basically, this is this is you. You should be saying this part.
All right. Well, we take. This time we have head-to-head of different players, and we ask for a 30-second take, which usually lasts 3 minutes in our case. But in this case, we'll try to speed it up a little more because we're short on time.
All right. So, better fantasy careers, points only league. Denton Matichuk or David Jiricek. And I'm mentioning Denton Matichuk because I know that you just did an article for EP Rinkside for Denton Matichuk as well. So I'm very curious. I'm an owner of Denton Matichuk and of David Jiricek. I don't know which one
Actually,
I need to.
We own Matichuk in DPR.
Oh, there you go. All right. So your take on that one, Victor?
To me, it's Jiricek. I think he's, well, I mean, I love both these players, but I do think that Jiricek will be better, clearly in Bash, but I think probably also in points. I think it's a bit debatable. The reason I think that is because I think he's going to be more likely to play as a top pairing defenseman for the next decade and a half or so. And Matejchuk, I think, could, but I'm not convinced. Like, he might be a second or third pairing or worse, potentially. I don't think that will happen, but I think his role in the long term is a little less secure. I think he's awesome, but I'm not sure that he will be for sure that staple in the lineup, partially just because he's a little bit undersized. But, I mean, he's proven it at every level, so I don't have a lot of doubts, but I do think that there's just a few more doubts with him, so I would go Jiricek.
All right, number 2, Simon Nemec or Luke Hughes?
Well, this one's easy because I think I've been a known Nemec skeptic for a long time now, and I love Luke Hughes. I love Luke Hughes. I think that Nemec is clearly a better all-around defenseman. There's no question about that in my mind. Hughes still struggles with some of his pivots, and he's never been the best defensively. But man, he knows how to score. And playing with his brother forever, they're gonna rack up so many points. So. I think Hughes is someone who kind of needs the power play too, whereas Nemec doesn't. Like, I think he's going to be a really decent even strength producer, but Hughes is going to be on the power play with his brother for next decade. So it's going to be Hughes.
All right. Next up, another heated discussion we had here. Zellweger and Mintyukov, both of the Anaheim Ducks.
Man, I've wanted it to be Zellweger for such a long time.
Oh, no, it has to be with Zellweger.
I just don't know. Right? It could be. I think if you use the same logic I just used in New Jersey, it would make sense to make Zellweger your power play quarterback and make Mintyukov your all-around defender. That would make sense. I'm not sure it's going to work out that way because I do think that they offer different things. Am I misremembering? Isn't Mintyukov right-handed? So there might be a handedness issue.
Yeah.
Because I definitely remember Zellweger being left-handed. And he's a little undersized, right? So even though he's pretty good defensively and he competes really hard, he still has the size issue. So I think he's going to have less time on ice. Like, I could see Zellweger being more of a second or third pairing top power play guy, whereas Mintyukov is going to be out there all the time and might also run the power play. So that's the part that gives me pause and makes me think it's Mintyukov. So did I remember right?
Oh, Nick is looking now.
I pulled it up, but I have the slowest computer out of all three of us.
The
pretty sure-
internet,
No,
you don't-
he's left-handed.
He's
They're
left-handed?
both left-handed. All right.
the internet only works well when we talk about the Habs. If we're not talking about the Habs, it's very slow over here.
Vince, why don't you lead us in with the last
Left-handed.
one?
Last one, no, you're missing one.
Oh
Nick.
no, I missed one. Nick.
Okay, so Moritz Seider or Simon Edvinsson. And the reason I'm asking this one specifically is because Moritz Seider came in and did very, very well right from the beginning. And then this year kind of took a step back. Whereas Simon Edvinsson, this is going to be his first full year, I believe. Do we see more offensive upside on one or the other?
I'm going to go with C, Axel Sandin Palika.
Aha.
Damn, yeah, I got him.
But no, I think in all seriousness, Moritz Seider is an incredible all-around defender. I wrote about him in the EP Rinkside Fantasy Guide, which, hey, go check that out. He literally played the toughest minutes of anyone in the NHL, which is impressive. I mean, he was incredible. Like, he had such a hard workload, and he still managed to do pretty well. I think people look at his season and they're like, oh, what a step back. Like, no, he was dragging the whole team on his back. And so that has to be put into context. I think Edvinsson is going to be kind of similar in the sense that he's going to play tough minutes. He's big, he's strong, he's mobile. He doesn't need the power play. Could he? Absolutely. I think all of these guys could. But Palika is someone who probably needs it more than the other two, and I think he's a little bit more dynamic in his creativity. I think if I had to rank them, it would be ASP, Edvinsson, then Seider. But I don't know that it'll be Seider. I've wanted it to be Seider. I mean, I've wanted it to be Edvinsson too, but I just don't know that they're gonna. They seem to not want to give him as much. In fact, I was talking with Max about that on the show, Max Bullman, and I said if he was in the lineup all season, the Red Wings would have made the playoffs, and he agreed. I don't know what the Red Wings were doing. They kept him out, and at the end when he came in, he was awesome.
Yeah.
He was awesome, and it was too late though.
Yeah, they didn't make the playoffs by 1 point, if I'm not mistaken. They said on the podcast.
And
He
Seider
was
and
worth at least 1 point.
Yeah.
Edvinsson
Yeah.
was worth at least one.
Seider and Raymond are both unsigned, and they both signed PTOs, I think, in Germany or in Europe.
What? Really?
Yeah, didn't I see that? I saw that today.
Oh, false information,
I'm
Junior.
telling you. Okay, I'll look it up. Go to the last one. I'll
All
look
right.
it up.
So the
Last
last
one.
man, I'm not gonna like this answer for sure. Kevin Korchinski or Leshunov? You could just guess who I have.
I don't know. That'll help me. I think it's Levshunov. I always thought Korchinski was a little bit propped up by the strong WHL team he was on, and although Levshunov makes me a little worried whenever you watch him play, I just think like this guy's awesome, but is this gonna work in the NHL? Like he's very, very creative, very kind of ad-libby, which I think in the right situation could really work. Or the coach may just tell him to knock it off, and then that takes away a lot of his appeal. So I think it's Levshunov. It might be Dorsey, which is to be determined because I don't think they have a better option, but maybe at some point they do because that happens. But I'm not convinced it's Korchinski, so I would lean Levshunov if I had to pick one.
All right.
Just to clarify, they're both in Germany, but no, they didn't sign PTOs, but they're playing there. So people assumed that they did, but they did not.
They're still both RFAs?
Yes, they're both unsigned. I don't know
saw
what
so,
state they have. They have all the cap space in the world.
yeah. This is the
I just
problem
want
with
views.
Junior.
I just want views. That's all.
That's it. We're not going to ask any more questions. I had one more, but
No, don't do it.
I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I think we've allotted our time here.
Yeah.
We are very thankful for your time, Victor, because this was great. I think it solved a lot of the arguments that we've been having, at least according to me. It solved a lot of it because you agreed with me. But where can our listeners find your work? Where can what's upcoming in your field right now?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a great time. And you can follow me on X, Twitter, at Victor Nuño 12, VictorNuno12. And you can check out the work at EP Rinkside. I took the summer off after the draft to just recuperate and actually put out a bazillion Fantasy Hockey Life episodes. So I'm back writing at EP Rinkside. You can check out my stuff there. And if you have suggestions of who you want me to write about, feel free to mention them. You can also check out my podcast, Dobber Prospects Report with Peter Harling, where we're doing more specific prospect-related stuff. We are digging into some different lists and some training camp and players on the move. And then Fantasy Hockey Life with Jesse Severe, we're doing team-by-team previews, and we're wrapping up the last few here, and then we're going to get into our in-season content. So it's probably not hard to find me if you're looking. Hopefully you like the content, and feel free to reach out if you have any suggestions or questions.
Yeah, we love the content, which is why we reached out. So thanks a lot. Appreciate having you. And
absolutely. Thank you very much.
Maybe we do this again sometime.
Yeah, anytime, guys. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Victor.
Cue the outro.
Yeah, if you want to.
And please feel free to give us a 5-star review if you like this episode. Hit like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. We're on Apple. We're on Spotify. We're absolutely everywhere you could wish to find us. X, TikTok, Instagram at Partial Break Pod.
And if you thought Nick was a little jumpy at first, well, Nick was more nervous about this interview than he was for his first date with his wife. So that gives you an idea of how excited he was about this.
Thanks, Junior. Thanks.